Hey everyone, Jay here. Just want to make sure you know that I have a new group starting for my teacher training on October 21st. If you are already a teacher and you're looking for some new inspiration or to expand your teaching, or maybe you're not a teacher, but you practice some and you're interested in a deeper inquiry, and you've probably considered doing teacher trainings in the past but didn't do them for one reason or another, well, you might check out the program I put together. It's designed to adapt to your individual needs and be flexible enough that it feels like a support rather than a burden. If that sounds like something that might be of interest to you, then again, there is a new group starting on October 21st. I encourage you to get in on it. You can find out more and register at jbrownyoga.com/training. All right, here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. If you're new here, let me welcome you. Everybody else, what's up? How is everyone doing? Thank you for choosing to listen. I myself am having a bit of a moment here, my friends. Things feel like they have come round. That, in a way, this moment exists in a pattern that has repeated. But in its repetition, there's something different. It's happening in a different time, in a different context, and yet it feels like the same pattern that has happened before is happening again. Have you ever felt like that? Well, I do right now. Let me explain. Last night was the open house grand opening party for the Birdhouse Yoga Center. Those of you who've been listening know how significant it was for me. We really grinded it out there the last couple weeks to make it happen. There were all kinds of obstacles, but in the end, we pulled it off without a hitch. My wife got the place all painted up and beautiful. We got food together. My friend Carl showed up. Shout out to Carl. He played beautiful music. And in the end, the evening was everything I could have hoped for. It wasn't huge. It wasn't a lot of people. It was just a small, intimate amount of people composed of very dear old friends. None other than Leslie Kaminoff came. Shout out to Leslie, who made a trip out to share in the evening with me. Cheers to you, brother. And then, besides like dear friends that I've known, there were random new people who I have never met before, people who just live in the neighborhood or who have children who live in the neighborhood. The grandparents came, and some people just randomly heard about it and they decided to come and say hello and introduce themselves. And it seems like they are the sort of people who plan to come every week. And it was just overall a really lovely evening. It had a good feeling. It felt like it honored the spirit of the place and what I'm hoping it to be. It was wonderful. And I'm very grateful to everybody who came and to everybody who contributed. For those of you on the email list, I am going to send out a photo gallery tour of the place so you get to see it. If you're not on the email list, you go on the website and get on the email list. If you want to see the place, I'm going to send out some photos for everybody. Tomorrow is the official first day of classes there, and a couple people who came to the party said they were going to come to class on the first day, so we will see. Feels good, but I also have to admit that there has maybe been a little backlash today. You see, we've been working so hard to get ready for this, And my daughters have been super busy too. Like my eldest daughter is in color guard in high school in this big band. So she had the big weekend herself with all of her stuff. And then even my youngest daughter had this like big birthday party she went to. So it was just a really eventful and full weekend. And then today it felt like it caught up with us. And my wife is very much under the weather. She wasn't feeling well. And my daughters were just acting horrible and fighting with each other. And so all of that amounts to the fact that I got thrown completely off of my usual schedule. Like people who know me know I have a very regimented and regular schedule. I do stuff like at the same time every week. I kind of stick to my rituals. And Sunday is a podcast day for me. I do the podcast on Sundays, but with my wife not feeling well and the chaos of the day, I had to break from my usual routines and I had to take care of some stuff that I don't normally have to take care of. And so here I am late at night on a Sunday night doing the intro, which is just like old times. If you have been listening for long enough, you might remember I used to have that be the ritual. It was very late at night. And that was at another time when I had a yoga center. It was 9 years ago. I looked it up before I hit record. August 2015 is when I released the first episode of this show. I still had the yoga center in Brooklyn. I had a very unbelievably busy life, and I would always be doing these intros late at night. And I eventually didn't like that, and so I switched it. But here we are, 9 years later. I'm up late trying to make an intro happen, and I got a yoga center. Who would have ever thought that would happen? Certainly not me. But things come round again. And as I've been saying over the last few weeks, with all the challenge and stress of it, it still feels good to be putting my energy into something and having a direction and having a focus. And I'm excited for the start of classes tomorrow. So onwards and forwards. And this idea of things coming around again and of kind of looking back over what's happened and how we got here to make some sense of what we're choosing to do going forward is very much the topic of discussion today with my guest, Bobbi Misiti. Bobbi was recommended to me by a listener of the show as a longtime practitioner and someone who had a yoga center from 2001 until 2017. And she's someone who has witnessed the very same progression that I'm always talking about here on the show and kind of had a viewpoint on it that is what I would call old school. Bobbi is old school, and it was great fun to connect with her and trace some memory lanes, see if we can make sense of what's going on now. So very happy to have spoken with Bobbi, and it's my pleasure to be sharing it with you today. Real quick before we get to it, let me just mention that if you enjoy the show and you want to connect with me in ways outside of just listening, there's opportunities to do that. I've got ongoing live classes and a weekly discussion group. I've got an upcoming teacher training starting in a few weeks. Or maybe you want to get into the full-length archives of this show and become a supporter with a podcast premium subscription. You can find all of my stuff at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, as I said, it's late, so we'll leave it there. I will touch base with you on the other side, but let's go ahead and get to it. Let's listen to this conversation that I had with Bobbi Misiti. Hello?
Hello.
Hi, Bobbi.
Hi, Jay. It's so nice to get this opportunity to talk with you.
It's lovely to meet you. I think you mentioned that you listen to the show, so you may already know, but just in case, I am recording, and I'd like for us to consider ourselves having just begun, if that's okay with you.
Yes.
Cool. Well, it's great to speak with you. I want to first ask you something off top because I was just looking at like some notes I took about you and saw that you were from Central PA.
Yes.
And that, if I'm not mistaken, you had a yoga center. Was it in Central PA?
Yes. It was just outside of Harrisburg.
Okay, so that's not that far from me. I'm in Easton.
I was going to ask where you were. I've heard you mention Pennsylvania in some of your podcasts that you were there.
Yes. So here's my question to you, Bobbi. When you opened your yoga center just near Harrisburg, back when, which I guess, what was it, like 2001 or something, right?
2001 is when I officially opened a center. I had already been teaching for several years prior to that out of a small space in my house.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll get to the prior to that, but I want to just focus on the opening of the center right now. Specifically, do you remember having to go through a whole bunch of rigmarole with code inspectors in order to get the proper permits to open?
No, I did not.
Yes. Well, I tell you, man, Easton does not make it easy for a new business to open. I just had like a inspector here today, and it's fine. It's all going to work out. You know what I mean? But they really seem to make it harder than it needs to be. And
yeah, well, congratulations. Did you so I guess you didn't open your new center just yet.
no, that's what's having me pull my hair out a little bit. Is I want to set a date and tell everybody when I'm starting classes, but technically I'm not allowed to do that until I have the proper permits to open.
Huh. Yeah, I don't know.
Here's I'll give you an example. And this is just for anybody listening to, and this is a total tangent, but I kind of get this off my chest before we can get to the conversation that I want to have with you today. I wanted to put a sign out front, a small sign, 24 inches by 24 inches square with my little Birdhouse Yoga Center logo that we made.
Mm-hmm.
And when I found out that there was all of these permits that I needed to do just to open the business, I also looked and saw, you're supposed to get permits if you want to put a sign. So I was like, okay, I want to play by the rules. So I pay the fee, the nice sized fee, and I put in my application for a sign. And then I got a note back from another inspector saying, your sign has to be at least 8 feet high.
Huh.
What? I'm like, what are you talking about?
That's like the opposite problem I had. I did have to jump through hoops for a sign.
Yeah, you did.
I did. And it was not easy, especially I actually moved my studio 3 times. And the third location was the hardest. It was in this quaint little town called Camp Hill.
Uh-huh.
And it was a challenge. I mean, I had to not only go through the landlord, but the zoning committee. And
yeah.
So, yeah. And
well, so you know what I'm talking about. But here's the crazy thing. I had the inspector here today, and it was a different inspector who was dealing with the sign than this guy who was doing the certificate of occupancy or whatever. So I'm talking to him, and I'm asking him, I say, can I ask you about the zoning requirements for signs? And he's like, sure. So I explained to him, I show him, I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to put a sign right here, but I was told that it has to be all the way up there. And I said, but look, like right across the street from me, there are like 3 other businesses that have signs that are not that high. And he said, yeah, that's really weird. That doesn't make any sense. Let me go find out about it for you. I'll call you later. And I was like, oh, cool. Maybe I'm going to be able to put my sign up. Well, I heard back from him, and it turns out, I guess, that those other businesses just never applied for a permit, and I just have had those signs up for like at least the last 7 years that I've lived here.
Yeah.
And now I think because I said something, they might be getting a letter.
Uh-oh. Yeah. Well,
which is so lame. Basically, what it means is if I hadn't played by the rules, if I had just put my sign up and not filled out the application, I probably could have gone for years and years and years before anybody would ever even say anything.
Yeah, that's frustrating.
But because I wanted to play by the rules, so, it's frustrating. But like I said, ultimately, if I still get to start classes on the 30th, like I'm hoping, then I still get to start classes and it doesn't really matter. But a whole lot of stress that was unnecessary, seems to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know why. I guess it's a challenge of our determination because
It really is.
Yeah.
And you know what it is that yoga, and this has been true for me, and this does bring us to what brings you and me together today, is that yoga has always kind of existed in a certain margins.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for instance, some of the codes that they're talking about are like for storefronts, you know what I mean? Or for different kinds of businesses. Like my space is essentially like an apartment,
Right.
So it doesn't have the same thing, and yoga classes don't work in the same way. And like, even when it comes to like, when I had to try to buy a house and they're like, how do you make your money? And trying to explain to someone how a yoga teacher makes money.
I've been there. Yes.
We've always existed in the margins in a way.
Yes. Yes. I always said I fly under the radar.
Yes, I know. Until sometimes when we can, and then we interface with it and we're like, oh my God, I live such a weird life. So, so here's the deal. Bobbi, the reason we've come together is a listener of this show, regular listener of this show, mentioned you to me and said, I think that you should talk to Bobbi. She's been around as long, if not longer than you, and has owned centers and has seen it all happen too. And a lot of this show has been trying to kind of lay down some oral history and kind of trace the trajectory of the way that yoga came into the mainstream and became this big thing.
Yeah.
And then kind of like, especially over the last few years, there was like crashes even before the pandemic, like everybody's teacher training numbers were down in 2019.
Which is why I never jumped on that boat.
Well, we could talk about that. That's very interesting. So first, you mentioned that prior to opening your center in 2001, you had been doing a whole bunch of other stuff. And I did read that starting as early as 1990, you were teaching stuff, maybe not yoga. Where does it kind of begin for you in terms of like starting to become maybe a practitioner first? Like, when do you first encounter yoga?
Yeah, I started teaching in 1990, but it was health and fitness and wellness and just overall healthy lifestyle. And it was through that journey, about 2 years into it, I started dabbling in yoga. And I initially just took a class at a community center. And it was a Kundalini class, and I didn't like it. But I had some books, and I was referencing these books, and I would end all my, I did a lot of one-on-one and group classes, group exercise classes. And I started to end all my classes with like maybe just 10 or 15 minutes of yoga. And I introduced like the classic sun salute was like my first step into it, at the end of my classes. And everyone really liked it, but I didn't even call it yoga then. I was calling it like strength and stretch or things like that. Yoga wasn't even a thing.
Yes, if you were like, I always say in like 1990, when I first started practicing, or it was shortly thereafter, but if you went to a party and someone asked what you did and you said, I'm a yoga teacher, they would ask, what's that?
Yes, I know. And so it was, I kind of retreated to the books for a while, and I had a Hatha yoga book and a Iyengar book, and then a book by Andrew Van Lysbeth, who turns out years later, I learned it was called Yoga Self-Taught, that he wrote that after spending time with Patabhi Jois in Mysore. And so that was kind of my start until in 1996, I stumbled across Beryl Bender Birch and the ashtanga practice. And I jumped in, or my friend likes to say, I fully inhaled the ashtanga practice and lifestyle, and took off from there with it. And
I see. So 6 days a week, except for moon days.
You got it. And during menstruation, of course, no practice.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I was full in for a very long time. I no longer practice quite like that, but that's we'll talk about that as we get there.
Yeah. So, all right. So you start doing ashtanga when in like the early 90s, right?
Yeah, well, I was actually doing bits and pieces of Ashtanga prior to that, but I didn't know it. Still, when I was doing still more fitness, but incorporating yoga, Baron Baptiste was in the Philadelphia area then, and he was teaching at fitness conferences. And so I was taking my very first real yoga class was with Baron, and he was doing some Ashtanga. And then I was also studying with this, it was through the Reebok University, and she was a physical therapist, and her name was Deborah Ellison. And she was doing yoga in with her physical therapy. And at the time, I didn't know it until after I learned the Ashtanga practice. She was pulling bits and pieces of Ashtanga in, but I had no clue. It wasn't until I started taking classes with Beryl that I really got to practice in the Ashtanga way.
I see. And when you started with Beryl, I mean, she was calling what she was doing power yoga, if I recall. She's been on the show, I remember. And I actually saw her recently at the Berkshire Yoga Festival. It was really great to see her.
I love her.
She's still out there doing her thing. It's so great.
I know.
But she was calling it power yoga. I remember her talking about kind of bringing Ashtanga to runners, essentially.
Yes. Yeah. Her husband was actually a professional runner.
So did she tell you that this is Ashtanga yoga when she was teaching it, or was she calling it power yoga? No,
she's referring it more as Ashtanga yoga. She was kind of outcast from the Ashtanga community because of her book.
Yes. And she talked about it. Yes, I remember.
Yeah. Yeah. And that always made a soft spot in my heart for her too, because she really, I think she had a lot to offer the community.
Well, I think it's significant only because it does kind of establish from the beginning for you that your relationship to Ashtanga wasn't necessarily Patabhi Jois.
Correct.
So that puts you in a different position than people who did look to him as sort of a guru,
Yeah, yeah. No, I did experience his classes when he would come to New York City, but that was the extent of it.
Like the big 600-person classes at the Puck Building, you mean?
Yep. Fun times, but pretty crazy.
Those were crazy. I never actually went to one, but I remember them happening, and they were wild.
No, eye-opening for me, very eye-opening.
Now, what do you mean by that? When you say eye-opening, what do you mean?
Oh, seeing the good and the bad of the yoga community and the whole yoga scene,
And when you say the good, I can imagine, all those people practicing together, there's a real powerful energy to that. And just the combined intention, people were in it for real reasons, I mean, people were serious practitioners, especially Ashtanga practitioners,
Yes.
So there's all kinds of good, but what I can imagine some of the bad parts, but I'm curious from your vantage point, because I was in New York, kind of living there, just visiting and seeing that scene. What were the parts that rubbed you wrong?
Well, it was a bit cliquey, and there was definitely a hierarchy, and I never liked the guru aspect, though I did appreciate it. It did mean a lot to me at the time, going to get to do these classes with the Jois family. Especially my very first trip was just after 9/11, and it was a really special time to be in New York City. So, but still, it's there's definitely a hierarchy over who can do the most beautiful asana, and also who and some of that aspect of it. And everyone always wants to be closer to the guru, whoever that is at the moment.
Yeah, there was I've often said in a way back then, and it was sort of before the proliferation of 200-hour teacher trainings, which you said you opted out of, and we can talk about that.
Yes.
But before the proliferation of that, the way that you had any credibility was citing who your teacher was, who the master teacher was that you learned from.
Yes.
And proximity to the master kind of gave you more cred or whatever.
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
and that proved to be a very big problem for a lot of those people later on.
It did, and I was even saying, the whole parampara just means bloodline. It just means who's the next in the bloodline.
Well, I've also heard it defined otherwise in terms of just like the way teachings are passed from teacher to student. But that's an interesting, you're saying that you've heard it defined as meaning simply bloodline.
Well, no, I'm saying, no, I understand parampara means that which was handed down from generation to generation.
Yeah.
But I'm saying it's not necessarily handed down to the most eligible teacher.
Right. You're talking about all the politics that's involved.
Yes.
That statement doesn't encompass alone. I get it.
Yes.
Right. So, okay. At any point, other than those big, huge classes in New York, I saw that you studied with Manju some.
I did. I got to study with him quite a bit. Well, I have to say, I studied with Beryl probably a good 5 or 6, well, even longer than that, really, because it was 2003 when I first met Nancy Gilgoff. But around 2000, 2001, I wanted to learn more of the second series, and Beryl really liked primary, and she just wasn't teaching a lot of second. So I started going to different yoga conferences, and I ran into the Swensons, David and Doug. And of course, being an Ashtangi, I kind of followed them all around. This was in the year 2000 in Austin. There was a yoga convention that I went to.
They were huge. I've talked about that. They were like giant rock shows almost.
Yeah. The certain Ashtanga teachers, for sure. That was anyway, so I was talking to David and I said, I'm looking for another teacher who can teach me second series. I really want to be with a female teacher. And he told me about Nancy Gilgoff, and that was the first I heard about her. And then it took me a couple years to actually get a workshop with her, but she came to Vermont in 2003 and I went, and it was it for me. And I stayed with her until she's recently passed.
Wow. Well, I've heard her name many times. She's been mentioned on the show before, but we've never really spoken about her. I didn't even wasn't aware of her passing even so much. Can you say something about Nancy? What was so special to you about her and her teaching?
Well, initially, and I will get back to Manju then, but it was really through my connection with Nancy that I started getting to experience Manju. Well, actually, I have to. I'll get back. I want to get back. Actually, that's not true. I actually started with Manju even before Nancy because he was in Philadelphia and 1999, 98. So I'm actually missing that point. I'll go back to that.
Okay.
What first drew me to Nancy is, first of all, she had no ego, no ego over the asanas, like, who could do what asana, because, she came into the practice herself, not really a healthy person. She always struggled with her health all her life, and she never had a lot of energy, and she didn't follow, she followed certain rules, because Ashtanga is about a lot of rules, but she relaxed a lot of other rules. And she also, actually, what felt good in my body is she taught forward bending with a rounded spine. And that, of course, was the opposite of how Beryl taught it. But I had this issue where if I did too much primary, and I was doing it the way I had learned it from Beryl with the extended spine, it didn't feel good on my back. And so when I started with Nancy and I was given this other option of how to do primary, it felt better in my body. So there was that aspect of it. And just at that point in those early 2000s, Nancy was just kind of going out herself and getting known. And she was just very humble back then. And I really just fell in love with her presence. And, I had ups and downs. She's not always an easy person to love. But
well, that one example that you just provided about forward bending with a rounded spine is significant for me as well. I need to do my forward bends with a rounded spine more often nowadays, especially because for a long time, it was always taught to lengthen your spine in forward bends, not to round it. Where do you think that influence came from in Nancy? Did she ever say where she got that from? Because she certainly didn't get it from Patabhi Jois.
Correct. We came from Iyengar. Those were Iyengar alignments. And from what I understood, of course, Iyengar, BKS Iyengar, learned Ashtanga with Patabhi Jois from Krishnamacharya. But then after 4 months, he decided he didn't like it. And he went the exact opposite. And created.
But Iyengar is always a straight spine. They don't teach a rounded spine in forward bend.
I know that's where the straight spine came from. I'm saying
right. Okay.
Iyengar is all rounded spine, but I think Iyengar influenced the straight spine alignment.
Yes. Everybody was like, "Oh, I get the flow from Ashtanga and alignment from Iyengar." That was the combination that everybody was going with, or whatever.
Yeah, and Nancy was big on sloppy yoga. She called it sloppy yoga.
Yes, me too. I'm big on it now. It used to be about straight lines, but now I want curves. I want it not to be trying to make it a geometric shape.
I agree.
Oh, wow. So that is interesting. And the rounded spine thing for me is also huge because keeping my spine like extended for as much time as I did because I thought that was better caused a lot of issues that I reckon with now,
Yeah. And including stiff spines.
Yeah. And just pain, and too much mobility in a way.
That's the other thing. That's the other element I do like about Ashtanga is it does pull in the strength component, which is important because too much flexibility leaves you open for injury. And I hate to say it, but there's a lot of overuse injuries and injuries in general in a lot of yoga teachers.
I think that's true. We could get to that. First, I want to hear a little bit about Manju.
Yeah, okay.
Because I imagine his teaching was very different than Nancy's.
Yes, well, they were more in the same school. Nancy and Manju were close, and Nancy had Manju come to Maui many times. He taught out of her studio for years. But I actually I was still just remember I was studying with Beryl, and I saw that Manju Jois was 6 months out of the year, and this was the late 90s, coming to Philadelphia, and he liked Philadelphia, and he was going to split his time and live it was like 5 or 6 months each year in Philadelphia. And so it was like almost a 2-hour drive for me. And I had I have 3 grown children. And then my third child was just a baby then, and I was nursing, but I would get up Saturday mornings, made sure she had plenty of milk for the day, and I would take off. And he did have classes on Saturdays then. And once or twice a month, whenever he was in Philadelphia, I would go and do his Mysore classes, and he also would take privates. And so this is probably like 2000. I think it was 2000. I did a private with him on second series because that was kind of my focus and what I wanted to do when I would go to Philadelphia to practice with him. So that was a really nice experience. He gave me the whole series in one day. And
see, that's what I was just going to ask you. It's so funny you said that because you keep mentioning that you wanted to learn second series. And I was curious about the process of that because I know back in the day, it would be like, oh, do I get a new pose? Like you were given a new pose after you had mastered that one or whatever.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I have to say, learning primary with Beryl, it wasn't like that. You just did the class. But then when I started with Manju Jois and I went for second series, he would have me do all of primary. And in the Mysore classes, I would just, start to tag on the second series, just one pose at a time. And there was you didn't have to bind, you didn't have to do the pose perfectly. As long as you knew the pose and you had practiced it before, he's going to give you the next one. Mm-hmm. And so that went on for a little while in the Mysore class. So I maybe got a handful of the postures that way. And then I did that private with him, and he took me through the entire second series and put me in every single posture. So that was quite an experience. And then from there, I just kept on practicing it.
All right. Now, when you were doing that and you were getting those new poses, were you getting the old school hands-on adjustments?
Yes.
And would you do those hands-on adjustments to people now?
No. I can talk a lot about that too.
I'm backing my way into it because I don't know you very well. But I guess that I'm curious about that. I'm curious about how a lot of us, and you spent more time in it because I dabbled a little bit, but I actually got kind of turned off by the kind of sort of cultier aspects of it in certain ways, or click aspects, as you were saying, and those hard adjustments.
Yeah. I mean, I was fortunate that Nancy never did hard adjustments, and Beryl not so much either, though her husband would teach with her. And just being a man, I think men in general tend to give harder assists.
Well, in fairness, if you were doing it like your teacher was, and your teacher was Patabhi Jois, that's the way you did it.
Right. Yeah. And I did experience his adjustments, and they were way too intense. My first class was like the first class after 9/11 when he started teaching again. And there wasn't a lot of people there. And I was like the newbie on the block. And so he adjusted me, and like the first, a lot of the beginning part, at least at primary series. And finally, I remember we hit Janu Shirsasana A, and I'm like, what do I need to do for him not to come to me? So it's like, head down, try to look like everyone else, hide. I don't want another assist. They were brutal, just way too hard for me. But, I kept going back year after year, but it was
so why would we keep going back when they were so hard on us? Because we thought we needed it.
Yeah, at some level, I thought this is the practice. This is, I can't pick and choose what I want. I mean, I now have a different opinion on that. But back then I thought I got to do the practice as the practice is meant to be done.
Right. And I think that holds true, but it's interesting what you just said, that it is different now.
Yeah.
And the reason it's different is because those masters who were kind of people were putting their trust in, they abused that trust. And I think not more, but also just the physical realities. At some point we had to admit to ourselves that all this chronic pain in our bodies might be because of some of the stuff we were doing to it.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. So, but Manju Jois his assists were not as rough as his dad's, for sure. But, he's a man. And like I said, men they have a little more strength. They sometimes just don't realize, I think, in their adjustments.
And but Nancy did adjustments. They just weren't hard adjustments.
Correct.
Interesting. And maybe I know I asked this already, remind me, where did was the softness that Nancy was bringing to it just her, or was she drawing upon other influences?
Well, okay, for asana, she is all about Patabhi Jois. She lost her father, I think she was around 18 or so, and that was who she was closer to with her parents. And it was shortly after that, she had been dating David Williams, and he wanted to go to India, and she was just his girlfriend, and she went with him. And she met Patabhi Jois there, and I think it was 72, if I'm correct. I could be wrong on that year. And she was sick when she was there. And so he taught her very differently than how he taught David. Like, he had David doing all the jump backs and like 5 A's and 5 B's and,
standard. That was what you were supposed to do.
Yeah. And Nancy, he like had her do like a few A's and no vinyasas, and gently, like she would just wait for him. He would put her in every pose. She like didn't do anything without him. So she just, her loss of her father, Patabhi Jois filled that void for her. So she had this dedicated love to Patabhi Jois. But so that was her asana teacher. She did also study with Baba Hari Das in California. And so she does some of that, a lot of his influences do come in, but not with the asana. With the asana, it was always this is how she learned it from Patabhi Jois, who she called Guruji. And this is how he taught me. And he taught me this softer way. And he told me I should teach as I was taught. So it just let her teach a softer practice. And when everyone is starting to do, like when I first learned with Beryl, we never did vinyasas between right and left side. That was something that developed later.
They just started adding more in, and then.
Yeah. And Nancy never jumped on that boat. I mean, when she would do a lead primary, she would cue the vinyasas, but she didn't care if you took them or not. And many times she would recommend not to.
So I mean, that's really interesting to hear that Nancy got like a softer application of the method or something, because I don't know of anybody else I've heard that from. And there were plenty of women who were not treated with softness by Patabhi Jois.
That's correct. Yeah, no, but for Nancy, for some reason, they had a special connection.
So I don't know the timelines and of her passing. Were you in contact with her when like all the stuff came out about him?
Yes.
And what did she say about that?
She didn't like it. I mean, she didn't want to talk about it. She didn't like it. She didn't say this about the people who were, talking about the Me Too thing. She blamed it more on the yoga clothes that women wear in general, and that it's not really appropriate. So she just talked more about yoga wear in general and how inappropriate it was. And whether she believed the stories or not, I don't know. I mean, I was oblivious to it, although, I mean, I was.
I mean, all I would say about it is this, like, because on this show, when it was all coming down, like, I stoked a lot of controversial conversations and had all different kinds of people on to talk about it, and kind of, I think, got caught up in the kind of like, let's get them vibe or whatever, with like the kind of sensationalizing of everything. And since have come to really, see that it's a much more complicated and gray picture, not as black and white as we wanted to make it. However, having said that, I would say it is pretty much established at this point that those stories are true. It's not like people just made stuff up.
I agree.
And I've heard people say that, yes, it was sort of like the westernizing of culture of the yoga pants or whatever that was the out of context situation that these guys were in. But at the same time, I think most of us who are yoga teachers want to say, no, it needs to be on the yoga teacher to be held responsible and to be the one to hold the space in a way that's true to like the kind of deal you make where you give respect to a teacher,
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I feel the stories are true, and it's a big disappointment to me. I went through, when that first came out, I was going through a challenging spot with my studio anyway, and I just lost total faith in ashtanga and in the yoga community in general. At that point, when all that went down, I felt like I was done with yoga. Yoga was such a big part of my life, but for me to even say this, I didn't even want to admit that I was a yoga teacher. I just didn't even want. If someone didn't know me, I went through a phase. I'm over that now. But just right around that time, I just totally fell out of love with the whole practice. And I lost faith in the teachers and the lineage and everything. But I've come through that. I came back actually and realized I think the yoga industry needs me. I have a different message.
Well, I mean, I think that your story is the same as many. Is kind of, as I've said, you and I both are kind of trajectories in lives paralleled what happened in the broader yoga world. So, as we said earlier, these yoga masters were the people who granted everybody all of the wisdom and all of the Shaktipat, and were the ones who were like the bestowers of the mantle to be a good yoga teacher. And I think it's such a mixed bag. I've talked about this many times, how a lot of people had very positive experiences, learned things that they continue to utilize and that help them to this day. And even didn't have a direct experience of those teachers as abusers, right? And then to learn that they were abusive, it's sort of like how do you hold both things, not very easily. So that kind of thing that you went through where you lost faith, I think many people have, but there's something that brings you back again, right?
Yeah, it does, and it's it's a big part of my life. I just feel like it's interwoven in me. It's part of my lifestyle. It's part of what I do.
Yes.
And even,
no, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I say, even with my teaching, I've tried a couple times to maybe go in some different directions, and I keep getting called back to teaching.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.